We're delighted to welcome you to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol, straight from the Darbar Hall of Diggi Palace. It's a pleasure to present today Girl in White Cotton, the story of burnt sugar. Avni Doshi in conversation with Janice Pariat. Avni Doshi's Booker shortlisted novel Burnt Sugar, published as A Girl in White Cotton in India, is a vivid and unsettling account following the complex relationship between a mother and daughter. Tracing the fragile line between familial devotion and deception, the tale evocatively brings up the subjective nature of truth and the reality of toxic relationships. In conversation with author and poet Janice Pariat, they examine the roots of this compelling and raw narrative and unravel its questions of identity, love and trauma. Avni Doshi was born in New Jersey and is currently based in Dubai. Burnt Sugar is her first novel. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2020 and is published in India as Girl in White Cotton. She is now working on a second novel. Janice Pariat is the author of Boats on Land, a collection of short stories, and Seahorse, a novel. Her novel, The Nine-Chambered Heart, is being translated for publication into 10 languages, including Italian, Spanish, French, and German. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section on your screens. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Girl in White Cotton, the story of burnt sugar, Avni Doshi in conversation with Janice Pariat. Enjoy the session.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's a rather lovely spring day here in Delhi, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. And honestly, I am so thrilled to be here with Avni. Avni and I have known each other for so long virtually, and we haven't had the pleasure of meeting face to face. But I hope, Avni, that this little session signals good things to come, that this is paving the way for us to share a glass of wine at some point this year, if not sooner. Yeah? How are you doing?
I'm good. I was actually just thinking that even though we haven't met in person, I feel like we have. So I'm always, surprised then to think, oh God, actually we haven't met in person. I feel like we've interacted so much over the years.
Yeah. I know, and like you were saying, that our lives have been sort of so entwined, and I actually feel that this is such a special point at which to meet and have a little chat, a little conversation, because I've also sort of followed, your writing, how it's been going for so long. Of course, from a distance, sadly, but honestly, just so thrilled that all of this success and all of this sort of wild success has come your way, because it's so well deserved. So sending you congratulations all the way from here, all the way to you, Avni. Yeah. I think I just want to start with asking how you're doing, because I know last year was a bit of a crazy year for all of us. I think I remember reading somewhere that, you'd just been shortlisted for the Booker, you'd had a beautiful, happy, healthy baby girl, congratulations. And, you were having a wonderful year, and the world was falling apart. And how has it been after? Has it improved? Has that strange sort of juxtaposition of joy and terror sort of subsided a little bit?
I guess joy and terror are more closely linked than we normally assume. I think that the last year brought that into more like clearer relief for me to some degree. I felt that they were kind of pushing up against each other in a way that was impossible to ignore. I've had a beautiful year in terms of my career, and then it's also been, difficult in other ways, as it has been for everyone around the world. And I think that is a difficult thing to integrate. It's a tough thing to kind of really absorb and sit in for too long. It can make you a little bit uncomfortable.
Yes.
It's led to a lot of conversations I've had with myself where, I've almost questioned the good things because of all the bad things that have been happening around. And then I've maybe questioned if I deserved the good things. So there have been those kind of strange internal private conversations that I've had.
Yeah.
But I guess that's part of the whole process of being alive today.
No, absolutely. I mean, this last year has felt like a very long and strange journey when it's just been a year. But I do know that it's been a long and perhaps strange journey even for you as a writer with this book, right? I read Girl in White Cotton before it was even published. I had the absolute pleasure of receiving the uncorrected proofs in my hand. And I remember looking through the manuscript and then calling Rahul and saying, "What is this? What have you sent me? It's devastating. Why are you doing this to me, Rahul?" And Avni, I reread the book, of course, for our little conversation today. And I have to say that I love it. I love it even more, if that's possible. I think it just held up new things, as rereadings always do. But you have said that when you started out, it was a lot like writing in the dark. Oh my God, you had no clue what you were doing. No idea about craft. And I love sort of this candid, sort of sharp honesty, by the way, Avni, and it runs through your writing as well. But I was wondering, how did you sort of write through that darkness, and how did you emerge, I can't resist this, into some sort of light?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being one of the first readers of the book, and you actually were one of the first readers. I think sometimes when you're inside the world of literature and inside the world of writing and publishing, it's hard to remember that everyone else, including often readers, are on the outside of it. And that's where I was. And I was completely on the outside. I only knew the books I loved, the ones that I loved to read. Some of them were part of this, kind of strict canon of white, dead writers. And some of them were, maybe a little different than the normal thing you're given to read at school. But for the most part, my writing journey began as a reader. And I never took a creative writing class. I didn't know that creative writing was a thing you could study. I heard of it, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I turned to art history. And it's funny because a lot of people say the same thing about art history. They're like, you can study art history, how bizarre. But
we both did, and we loved it.
We both did. So I loved that so much. But there was a kind of a distance where I felt like, even though I was engaged I was so deeply engaged in all this creative work, I didn't feel like I was able to kind of explore my own creative urges. And that's really, that kind of void is the void I wrote into to begin with. And it was dark, I guess, as voids are. I didn't really know where to begin. I didn't know where to look for the light. I looked to books that I loved to read, but I didn't have this varied diet of literature. Maybe I have a slightly more varied diet now. So there was kind of like, I think I was malnourished, if you want to say, in certain areas. And I thought I had to sound a particular way. I thought the book had to sound like a classic. I thought I had to sound like Henry James or even Marquez. I thought I had to sound, I thought I had to write something that would be in conversation to a kind of magic realism, what I understood as magic realism at that time. and now I know that that word in itself is kind of limited and problematic, but and it's strange because now I do feel in some ways I'm attempting to speak to Marquez in a different way, but I don't think it's necessarily in his language, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's funny the way these things happen. In a way, I guess it sort of comes full circle. I didn't. The darkness also, you know, included feelings that I never thought my work would see the light of day. I never thought anyone would read it. I thought it was just this private journey, something. I felt really self-indulgent, in fact, for a good part of the process. I thought, what, I'm wasting this time. I could be doing something more productive. And there was so much doubt. And I think that doubt can be a tricky thing. I think it's a constant dance, right? Because we write alone. I think even now, to some degree, even though I have these wonderful editors who are just so brilliant and inspiring, and I have, you know, people who now want to see my work, it's a constant dance with self-doubt. I think that writers experience. I'm sure you can speak to this much more eloquently than I can.
Wait, I'm just listening to you and going, oh my God, that is so true. Oh my God, that is so true in my head, of course. But absolutely. And I do think that self-doubt can be debilitating on one hand, of course. It can paralyze you, but it can also push you to write better, to be sharper, to push yourself, to, I don't know, it's a strange thing, self-doubt, because you can give into it and be paralyzed, but you can work to try and move around it, over it in some way, and make yourself do better. But it is, like you said, very, very tricky. But Avni, out of all of this, you know, out of the shadows, out of sort of the murkiness, emerges this incredible book, at the heart of which is this incredible character. So like you, I started out writing with no idea that you could even do a creative writing course. And some things, as you said, come full circle. And I now find myself teaching a little creative writing course, which is hilarious. So I go into class saying, this is not going to make you a writer, number one. But apart from that, what I do bring up in class is the importance of voice, and how incredible sort of it can be for a writer to find that voice, to find a character's voice. And Girl in White Cotton is the book that I would bring up and say, read this, look at this, look at how she has masterfully crafted Antara's voice. It is all voice for me. Well, the book is many things, but it is so much of voice. And I just want to know how, you know, how you found it. How did it come to you? Did it fall on your sort of page one day and it just rung true? Or was it a battle? Was it a struggle to find Antara?
I think it was a bit of a mix. I think I struggled to find a voice. You know, I don't have a very strong voice in my life. That I think is a personal struggle of mine, where I have a complicated relationship with silence and remaining silent when maybe I should speak. And that's something I continue to negotiate privately. And I think to some degree that played a part in the difficulty for me with the earlier drafts of the novel and finding a way in with the voice. But with this draft that you see before you that has been published now, it just came. It just kind of came into my mind one day, and it grew stronger and stronger and fuller and more insistent. And there were days when I felt I was a little bit being inhabited by this voice. And after a while, she was sitting in the room with me, really. And I could, you know, kind of confront her as I was writing. I could be in conversation with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Jung, I don't know if anybody is familiar with Jung's work, but he talks about this thing called active imagination. And sometimes I fantasize that it was a kind of active imagination where I was in conversation with, I don't know if it's a part of my own psyche or if it's some kind of separate, something separate that is kind of, that was coming through me in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know that those things are necessarily, you know, contrary to one another, but there was definitely a feeling that this voice was not mine. And for me, it became a really interesting discovery, you know, okay, this isn't me, who is this? And I think that was one of the beautiful things about writing it, is it was so much, even though I had written so many drafts and there were bits of the story that would emerge, and, you know, in a way I felt I knew all these characters and their backstories because I had written all these other drafts, there was a sense of real curiosity and surprise as I was writing. And I think that curiosity is what helps the work feel alive while you're writing.
Yeah.
The idea, there's something so, there's a pleasure, there's like a really deep pleasure, like an excitement in knowing that you can discover something. And this is not to say that I'm against plotting and, you know, really thinking through the narrative before you begin writing. I'm not against it, but I think eventually when you sit down to write, there has to be a way in which you can put all of that aside and trust in the process and in the voice, and maybe keep it a little open and see what comes through you and what comes to you. Yeah. Again, it's like, it's so strange to talk about it because it seems kind of really abstract and it almost seems a bit metaphysical, I think, in a way. But that is the process. It's such a strange, eerie, beautiful process to write. There's something that feels otherworldly at times. I don't know if you have that, if you feel that at all.
Absolutely. There is a deep mystery, I think, mysteriousness to writing. And Virginia Woolf, I think, was, very protective of it. Yeah. She said there are some things that we must not examine, that we must not look at. We need to gather it like a gift and put it away. So I'm glad in some ways that we fail to put into words how exactly it is done, because there are no words perhaps for how exactly it is done. And that there is, is the true sort of, is at the heart of it.
I love the word mystery, and I wonder if, what is a word for something that is so mysterious and unknowable, and yet at the same time quite mundane?
Yeah.
There's something almost banal about it, right? Because it's something that writers engage in every day, perhaps. So what is that? I don't know. What is that mystery that is so embedded in just that everyday part of existence? It can be as everyday as having your coffee in the morning, So that in itself almost has like a tension for me.
Yeah.
And again, to kind of integrate that tension is a fascinating part of the process as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And perhaps the mystery lies in the dailiness of it. And they can't be separated, like you said. But look at us getting all philosophical first thing this lovely afternoon. I did wonder as well, as you were saying that, you grew to know Antara so much better, and she was almost sitting in the room with you by the end of it. I was wondering, I'm sure that in a way, getting to know Antara also clarified the other characters for you around her, right? That in a way, they became fuller and more clear to you, even though you'd done all of these drafts before. I just feel like she's such a pivotal sort of point in the book that in some ways clarifying her clarifies everything, around her. I think Antara is such an incredibly difficult, prickly, frustrating even character. And of course, I know this is all deliberate, but I'm also really touched at some points by her vulnerability. There's a moment in the book where her mother cannot recognize her, where Tara doesn't know who she is because she's in one of her sort of, episodes. And Antara says, if she doesn't know me, then I am no one. And I thought that, vulnerable sort of dependence on someone who has repeatedly abandoned her was just, it was such a difficult thing to do. And you just, you pulled it off with one line. I know that, at the heart of the book, of course, is this tricky, convoluted, complicated relationship between the mum and Antara. And we'll get to that perhaps in just a little bit. But, the other relationship that I'm also quite fascinated by and also really unable to pinpoint, I can't figure it out. And it really it sits in my head because I can't quite get my head around it and my hands on it, is the relationship between her husband, Dilip, and Antara. And I just was wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit for us. I can never tell how Antara feels about him. And that's masterfully done. And I was wondering if that was deliberate on your part, how you saw that relationship playing a part in her life and in the book.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It was definitely deliberate. I was keen that all of Antara's relationships, in fact, exist in a kind of in-between space where it's, it's unclear, or it actually isn't either a kind of good, close relationship or a kind of bad, negative relationship. I think there's this, for me, that felt the most true. I don't believe that we have relationships that are completely just not fraught with any complicated feelings. And, we talk about motherhood as a theme in the novel. We talk about memory, but I think the real heart of the novel is this idea of ambivalence.
Yeah.
And I realize ambivalence is at the heart of everything. I mean, even my writing process can be kind of summed up in this. We were just talking about this tension, and I think ambivalence exists so deeply even in my writing process. So for me, Antara experiences deep ambivalence. I think even bordering sometimes on a kind of neurotic split between, what she wants of the world, what she wants to be in the world, how she wants to be perceived by everyone around her, including the reader. And yet, what about this trauma she carries and how that inevitably is kind of the film? It's the kind of glass through which she views the world. So that was kind of the central tension. And I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why she does have deeply mixed and complicated feelings about her husband. On one hand, he's saved her, and he saves her again and again. And I think there's a kind of gratitude for that. But at the same time, I think this question kind of floats through the novel that's not really asked directly. What if she didn't have to be saved? What would her life look like? And I think she might be also imagining somewhere in her life that there was this other path that she could have taken had she not been in various precarious situations throughout her life. And And I think that's what causes a lot of her pain and her anger. She also, as a child, I think, was in this dynamic of suppressing her aggression. And I think in her marriage as well, she continues to kind of suppress this aggression. And as the novel goes on, you see this aggression begin to come to the surface. And it's really powerful, because in a way, I think that might be that shadow part of her voice that is finally coming up for everyone to see. And I don't know if it's, sometimes I also wonder, is it that does she love her husband? Does she not love her husband? Or is it that she's just presented a version of herself where no one really knows who she is? Because she's trying to fit into all these boxes. She's trying to please all these people. And it's hard to know someone like that. It's hard to really know a person like that. And I think that's also the consequence of this kind of trauma, that because your parents were never really able to mirror you, because they were not strong enough to stand up to that kind of annihilation that a child requires and still emerge alive from that. She felt scared. She felt like who she was, there wasn't a container for it. And because there was no way to contain who she was, she transformed herself into something other than what she was. And I think that is something she until the end of the novel, she is still negotiating that. And I don't think that is something, I don't know if you can, I don't really believe you can think your way out of that. I don't believe therapy can get you out of that necessarily. That is a deep-rooted part of a personality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's even a scene sort of towards, the end of the book where, she does talk about a little session that she has with the therapist, and it just sort of washes off her. She blocks it out. Of course, because the therapist is asking her lots of questions, and this is precisely what she doesn't, want to face. But you're right. We're left wondering whether, even had she continued, even had she, gone for all of these sessions after, would that really, really have helped? Would that have gotten her out of this? And you're right. There are no answers. We don't know. And just as we don't know, even with Dilip and Antara. And I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I thought I'd try my luck anyway. But let's get to the women in this novel. And I know, again, there's been a lot of focus on Tara and Antara, but I was fascinated by this web that you weave of women characters through the book. Because yes, of course, there's Tara, and, she is all that Antara believes she isn't. But there's the grandmother, there's Kalima, there's also Antara's dad's mother, who, briefly sort of does play a part in their life at some point in the book. And then, of course, there's Dilip's mom as well. And I was just, wondering how you sort of brought these women together, how you saw them sort of fit into, of course, the story and the novel, but also the frames within which you placed them, in the story, that of unwilling mothers or unknowing grandmothers, sometimes even, of women. They all seemed to me a little lost, all of them. And I was wondering if you could talk about all the women in your book.
Yeah, so I saw the women. For me, my understanding of women in a kind of loose family, as the one in the novel is, although it's not a particularly traditional family setup, it's I see the women as the ones who kind of control the kin relationships in a sense. So even though everything is kind of existing in this very patriarchal structure, I see the connections or the disconnects between the women as kind of as the ones that actually produce the relationships, emotionally at least,
Yeah.
and to some degree psychologically as well. So I see this question of these mothers, these lost mothers. It's interesting because I've had conversations with people where we discuss this word ambivalence.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations where people say, this is a very modern thing, this maternal ambivalence. It's only because you're talking about it all the time and you're so aware of it, and that's why you're thinking about it all the time. But I had a really interesting conversation with some friends of my husband. They live in Norway,
Yeah.
and they hunt.
Yeah.
So I was just asking them about that because hunting is kind of a very foreign thing to me. And they were explaining that they go into the mountains and they hunt the baby goats or the mother goats, and they know whether it's going to be a good hunting season based on the climate or the scarcity of food. What are the conditions in the previous year? Because the mother goat will decide, based on what the conditions are, whether she is going to keep her baby, whether she is going to abort her fetus. And these are all decisions of motherhood.
Yeah.
So motherhood, in my opinion, so when we talk about these lost mothers, I think we assume that being a mother means I want a child, and therefore if you feel conflicted or ambivalent, you are a lost mother. But I would like to maybe not completely rethink that, but just kind of add a different element to it where we can consider that perhaps being a mother is so deeply connected to ambivalence. And look, I mean, baby goats are mother goats are ambivalent. So this is something pre-language as well, that there's a kind of perhaps a biological component to this, right? So I would argue that our grandmothers felt ambivalent, that our mothers did, that even before that, that there is a kind of ancestral line for this sort of ambivalence, and that it isn't about just having the language, that there is an instinctual element to this ambivalence as well. And so when we think about these lost mothers, I like to kind of consider also that, the idea, maybe they're not lost, maybe this act of questioning is also such a deep part of being a mother.
Yeah.
And that it's actually a necessary part of becoming a mother.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you for that, Avni. That was fantastic. And of course, within, we've sort of touched on this a little bit, but, this idea of trauma that is ancestral, that is passed down, that is generational, that in some ways is unacknowledged as well, because we have the means, the clinical means, for example, to detect, diabetes and how that might be passed on to, future generations. We have the clinical means to detect physical sort of illnesses that might be passed on to your children and your children's children. But we don't quite talk about the way that trauma is passed on and handed down and in some ways carried through through generations. And I was wondering if because it's very important, I think, that your book ends with the birth, with new life, the birth of Antara's daughter. And I was wondering how, how that sort of signaled, or not, the continuation, or in some hopeful way, the putting to a stop of that kind of carrying on of psychological trauma. I don't know if again, because it's, and I return to our favorite word of the day, ambivalence. It ends on a note of ambivalence as well. Of course, we don't quite know, but I was wondering if the birth of Antara's daughter held some signals for us to sort of hold on to.
I think symbolically there is this kind of light, right, where there's this new child, and it signals that perhaps there is, if there are these two kind of opposing forces, this is now a third, and the third is now the opportunity for something new. I think that is there's a sense of that for sure. The only thing that kind of that's a bit complicated for me in thinking about that in a very straightforward fashion is that I find that redemption and chronological time are tied in this particular way. And I think it's sometimes useful, but also easy to bury trauma under this kind of wall of chronological time. And I wonder if that's, I just wonder if that way of looking at life, if that way of kind of that sort of narrative of time might be a little too easy, and that might not actually be human time. You know, I think we experience this kind of, and again, there's something deeply masculine, and it's like connected to the way we think about patriarchy at large, to be quite honest. But in general, our institutions and our history and our canons are all kind of built on these ideas of time. But what about the other ideas of time? What about these bodily ideas of time? What about the time? What about the moments of time that are exploded and that kind of leak into others because of the pain attached to them? And this again ties into the idea of memory in the novel, where memory is not this kind of objective, linear, clean, I don't know, sometimes I think we think of like memory can almost be scientific in our minds, especially when we use it in a court case, for example. People are asked to come on the stand and discuss what happened and what they saw, and we take that as though it's so objective, and of course it's not. And so I'm interested, I guess, even though the baby kind of comes at the end of the book, and there's a sense that, of course, in terms of chronological time, this is now the heir of the trauma, but also a chance for some kind of new movement forward. I'm not entirely convinced that that is how human time really works.
Yeah.
And that's how our, I don't think that that's how our psyches operate.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes what happened to our grandmothers, even though it happened before we were born, can be so alive in us and in every experience we've had, and the way we go forward with our lives, that it's not so easy to find that kind of redemptive moment. Right, that was a very complicated answer.
No, not at all. I mean, I think that this, also gestures to how, deeply psychologically complicated your book is. That it's not, this is precisely why it's not easy. It's not, sort of sunshine and rainbows and, oh, I'm just going to breeze through this in an afternoon. It's not. It is as complicated as you just sort of put it for us just now. So no, thank you so much. And I feel like, because you put so much thought into not just the writing of it, but also into the things around the writing of it. I know we've had little chats over this briefly, but I was wondering how physically for you writing feels. I feel like it has a physicality, an aspect of physicality to it that not many writers talk about too much. I think we talk about the cerebral, of course, process of writing, how we, begin a book and end a book and structure and things like that. But how does writing physically make you feel, Avni?
Writing is enlivening. It's when I get something right, when I'm writing and it kind of turns out, I feel like, wow, I've actually done something that might be good. I think I feel probably more alive than with anything else. And then at the same time, there's this, because for me, the feeling of writing is also connected to a sort of rhythm of writing. And so there are these rhythms in terms of, like my daily schedule. Although now it's a little up and down with the two children, but I try to sit down and write, and I try to follow a kind of routine where it's, I start pretty early in the morning, and then I know by about noon, by about lunchtime, I'm hungry and cranky and my brain isn't working anymore. And I know basically after noon, whatever I write is going to be rubbish, but sometimes I still have more that I just need to get out.
Yeah.
And then I would also say that there's like this aspect of physical pain as well.
Yeah.
The sitting.
Yeah.
There's something strangely. There's something almost compulsive that happens.
Yeah.
Like I pace a lot when I'm writing. Sometimes when I'm working out a sentence in my head, I have to kind of pace up and down. And I don't know if maybe the steps help me hear a kind of music. Maybe there is some element of dance included in that. I don't know. But there are all these strange physical things I engage in. And also there are these dips, in energy. And I think you can sometimes reach a peak and then it ebbs. And I don't know, there's something strange about that, but you can almost count on, although sometimes it feels really elusive, you can almost count on a kind of rhythm that you'll reach a peak and then you'll kind of lose it.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess in my mind there's something sort of watery with regard to writing, something that's constantly moving. There's something that doesn't ever feel completely grounded. I guess if I had to kind of think of it a little more in terms of an element or something, I would think like a little more watery.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I
I don't know if that was your question. I just answered my own kind of question.
we always do that. We always answer the questions we want to answer, and that we always want to write the books we want to write. It's fine, Avni. I feel like we had lots of questions in the chat box, and I have been terrible and not gotten to any of them because I mismanaged time. I'm so sorry. This is terrible. And I thought that we had another 10 minutes to go, which is when
one question, or we really don't have time?
Yeah, can we take one question? I feel like there are so many and I don't want to disappoint everybody. Yes, please. Good. Akanksha asks, Miss Avni, to what extent do you think the toxic relationship between Antara and her mother affects the reliability of Antara's character? Do you feel that Antara is able to reveal everything about herself to the fullest of authenticity given her trauma?
I do think Antara is authentic to herself. I think we all probably have some kind of trauma that affects our subjective view. I think all narrators are unreliable. I think there are some that are kind of glaringly so, but I think the minute you're in the realm of that first person narrator, it's kind of good to it's useful to keep questioning that narrator's perspective, where they're coming from, what their motivations and goals are. Do I think she's particularly unreliable because of her relationship with her mother? I don't think any. I think trauma does a lot of things to us, but I think we're all deeply unreliable people. Yeah, I think we operate according to what we would like to gain and what our internal and psychological needs are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Someone also asked, were you ever tempted to give Tara a redemption arc?
Give her a what? Sorry?
A redemption arc.
I think in the previous drafts she did have one. And then as I told you, I was kind of visited by this voice of Antara. And then she really decided, I think to some degree, what the story would be. And there was not that much room for it. I think when I kept going back to this idea of redemption, there was a way in which I think there were attempts at it, but it felt somewhat untrue. I think at some point I began to think about redemption as this kind of narrative device that didn't necessarily have a place in this story.
Yeah. I think that would have been such a different book, really.
A different book, right? Yeah.
Completely, totally different. That was a question from Shrishti, actually. Good question. My sweetie, we will have to end here, although I have pages and pages of more questions. And this just goes to show that we have to meet, we have to talk, we have to continue this conversation. And really just so much sort of, love and thanks to everyone who joined us, everyone who is here. Thank you, JLF, for bringing us together. Avni, lots of love to you.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know you're in the middle of your manuscript as well. So yeah, thank you.
Not at all. So happy to.
Thank you, Avni and Janice, for this insightful session. Thank you so much for being part of Jaipur Literature Festival 2021. We'd like to thank our celebration partner, Diageo, and thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been critically impacted by the pandemic, and while we have braced ourselves to embrace the new normal, we have struggled to ensure that we can continue to bring you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. We would love for you to support us at Teamwork Arts. Any contribution is welcome and would help spread knowledge and ideas seamlessly against all odds. Please tweet using #Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 @JaipurLitFest. Remember, the festival is protected by Dettol. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.